After gaining their independence from the Etruscans in 509 BCE, the newly independent Rome had established a representative form of government. The Roman Republic was not at peace for long and had even more turbulent times ahead. Rome was involved in constant fighting with outside tribes and had internal disorder from within Roman territory. When the consuls tried to muster an army to fight the invading tribes, the troops revolted in the streets and refused to fight. What had happened in Rome that led to protests against the consuls? Rome was separated into two social classes. There were the patricians, who were the powerful aristocrats, and there were plebeians, or plebs, who were the simple commoners. Having origins as the highest class of the old Roman kingdom, the patricians were firmly entrenched as the class primarily holding the political power. With this, the patricians created laws to prevent the plebs from entering the government and gave themselves free rein in law. The plebs were lacking rights for themselves as well as the knowledge to know exactly what laws governed them. Knowing that, they desperately wanted to change this. If they were going to get the civil rights they longed for, they had to struggle and engage in conflict with the patricians to set the change in motion. The plebs' fight for their rights is an example of this struggle and left a powerful legacy which would be remembered over the ages. The patricians took advantage of their already high political status and placed the burden of warfare on the plebeians, as they were the common class of Roman society. The plebeians grew resentful as their homes were ravaged by invading tribes in times of war, and in their view, the patricians cowered behind the walls of Rome. The plebeians were financially unstable due to their constant warfare, distracting and leading them away from tending their farms. Because of this, they were unable to pay their taxes and eventually became slaves to their creditors. Without the plebeians owning their farms anymore, the patricians bought the farms for incredibly low prices and had accumulated massive estates from them, leaving the plebs with nothing left. The bitter plebs wandered around the streets of Rome until they eventually met up with each other and banded together to riot the streets. The patricians caught wind of this and realized they had two problems on their hands. They would have to deal with the outside tribes that were trying to seize them, as well as the plebs that were refusing to fight for them. They knew that without the plebs serving for their army, Rome would become vulnerable enough to be seized by them. They needed the plebs to come back to their side, and they needed a compromise to persuade them. Threatened by invasion, the patricians tried to unite the plebs by setting up concessions, which are privileges granted especially in response to demands. They reluctantly gave them a concession that would resolve their decline in economy. It was a law passed by the patricians which stated that no active duty Roman citizen could be enslaved or have his property confiscated. This law also required the election of one plebeian council yearly. The plebs happily agreed to this and came together to ward off the invading tribes. After defending Rome from the tribes, no new concessions were given as promised, and the previous ones were no longer enforced. This was a treachery that would be repeated many times. In 494 BCE, the plebs refused to fight once again and made a bigger protest outside the walls. The patricians, in fear of being attacked in a vulnerable state yet again, decided to make the tribune in order to protect the rights of the plebs. With this, plebs won more and more rights for themselves, but they were at the mercy of the consuls. They needed a legal code properly addressed to them so that they knew what rights they had and when those rights were ever violated. This would be answered with the creation of the famous 12 Tables. In 451 BCE, the Decemvirate were appointed to construct and draw out a code of law to resolve the issues between the patricians and the plebs. The Decemvirate were a group of 10 magistrates. These magistrates created 10 bronze tablets worth of laws that were favorable to the plebs because they protected the plebs by recognizing the abuse of the patricians. The plebs were finally protected from the enforced debt that would be placed upon them by the patricians. As the term of the first board of Decemvirate ended and transitioned into the second board in 449 BCE, the second Decemvirate completed the laws with 2 more tablets, resulting in the 12 Tables. These 12 Tables were the basis of Roman civil law. These laws promoted organized prosecutions for suspects of crime and created a system where the victimized parties could seek compensation from their offenders. In time, however, the second Decemvirate refused to let go of their power and became tyrannical. In that same year, the corrupt Decemvirate were removed from office by a revolt of the rising influence of the plebs. The 12 Tables were displayed in public for the plebs to know their rights and the laws of Rome in one unchanging collection. For a time, Rome was relatively stable and managed to suppress the anger of the plebs. However, their very own tribune was vulnerable to manipulation by the patricians. They found themselves once again at the mercy of the patricians and had to relive what started the conflict. The patricians sent them out to war only to take their farms and property yet again. The plebs' humiliation on the patricians left them bitter and angry. Soon, one man would learn how to harness his anger, either for his own purposes or out of true concern for the well-being of the poor of Rome. His name was Tiberius Gracchus. Tiberius Gracchus was born to one of the most politically connected families in Rome on an unconfirmed date between 168 and 163 BCE. He attracted both supporters and critics during his military career in Spain when he negotiated a peace treaty with the Numantine tribe to save a besieged Roman army from imminent destruction. On his way to Spain, he had seen how the land crisis was affecting the poor. According to Plutarch, when Tiberius was on his way to Numantia, he passed through Etruria and found the country almost depopulated, and its husbandmen and its shepherds imported barbarian slaves. He first conceived the policy which was to be the source of countless ills to himself and to his brother. Upon returning to Rome, he was elected tribune of the plebs and proposed a law which had been inspired by his earlier experience called the Lex Sempronia Agraria. This law limited how much land a single person could hold, which was 125 hectares. The majority of plebs were in favor of this proposal, and gave Gracchus their wholehearted support. A significant portion of the Senate, the Populares, backed the law as well. The conservatives in the Senate, called the Optimates, being the major landholders, were not so supportive and became desperate to stop Gracchus and the wave of popular unrest he inspired. With the second tribuneship open to election, the Optimates supported their candidate Marcus Octavius with massive amounts of money. Octavius vetoed Tiberius' every attempt to pass the Lex Sempronia Agraria. However, Gracchus and his supporters would not be denied, successfully bypassing the Senate and removing Octavius from office. Some began to worry that Gracchus and his supporters had power comparable to a king, which was a serious accusation at the time. With his term coming to a close, Gracchus ran for re-election. Rather than letting him retain the office, a group of conservatives had Gracchus murdered. After his death, many more politicians tried to use the office of the tribune of the plebs to further their career by capitalizing the plebs' anger over their lack of rights to their advantage. Some had moderate success, only to be resisted in increasingly difficult and violent ways, such as gang fights, riots, and in 50 BCE, civil war. After many successful military campaigns, politician Julius Caesar had acquired a good reputation amongst Rome as a consul. Widely praised for his conquest of Gaul, Caesar appeared to have a bright future in the Republic. He was well respected by the plebs and had thousands of loyal soldiers under his command.
Are you with me?
However, the Senate, paranoid from his previous encounters with politicians whose power lay in the lower class, ordered him to disband. This was against Roman law, as Caesar's term as consul had not expired. Caesar refused and prepared for war. With the plebs' opinion of the Senate, which was primarily negative, they turned to Julius Caesar and supported his cause for war, as they were convinced that he would be responsible for granting the people their rights that they longed for but they could not receive from the Senate. The plebs' struggle for their rights was a momentous conflict for equality and a major cause leading to the end of the Roman Republic. The plebs never earned the rights they fought for after being suppressed attempt after attempt by the patricians. They may have earned some of their rights they fought for through the 12 Tables, but it wasn't enough in their battle for equality. Their lack of rights had greatly demoralized them and forced them to take desperate measures. They trusted anyone they believed who could be responsible for getting them those rights. Eventually, Caesar was able to harness his desire for rights, giving him the power to take Rome for himself and to be involved in the civil war that ended the Roman Republic.